The next presentation, you will learn whom is the best to hire for your FinTech product, where to hire people and which places to avoid at all costs, how to structure the remote team management process, and how to minimize the legal risk and protect your intellectual property. Alexey Semeney is the founder and CEO of DevTeam.Space, an AI-powered software development platform. Alexey is an expert in software product development and remote team management. All the recommendations in his presentation are supported by data from managing over 600 developers on projects for over 150 organizations across the world. North America, Europe, UK, South Africa, Middle Eastern countries, Australia, Southeast Asia, and New Zealand. And if you have any questions for Alexey, please drop them in the chat box or in the comment section below. Alexey will be addressing your questions at the end of the presentation. Please take this opportunity to ask Alexey as many questions as you want. So guys, here is Alexey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexey Semeney, and today I'll share with you a presentation on how to hire and manage a remote software development team for FinTech startups. So make sure to stay till the end of the presentation because we're going to have a live Q&A. So this process I'm about to share with you is not some kind of theoretical idea or approach. This process has been actively used on more than 150 projects over the past 3 years alone, and altogether we used it to manage over 600 developers for projects for different organizations. So I hope that this process can also be helpful for your FinTech startup or your larger organization and can help you to advance and hire a remote development team and efficiently manage them. So first of all, again, this presentation will be most helpful for FinTech executives and startups founders. And second, even if you're not a FinTech startup founder, but you're working in a larger organization and your organization is planning to launch a new product or you're planning to hire a remote development team, then this presentation is also going to be helpful for you. So first, let's talk about hiring. So hiring in office versus hiring remotely is quite different, and it has its own pros and cons, and there are certain recipes on how to mitigate all of that. So number one is when you hire remotely, obviously you have an access to a much wider pool of talent, and that makes it much more affordable for you to hire developers because the competition among developers is much higher versus your local market. And I've spent 7 years in Silicon Valley, and believe me, hiring locally within the very overheated tech environment could be very, very expensive. It doesn't matter if you hire individuals or if you're trying to hire an agency. So, and obviously due to those two factors that you have an access to a wider pool of talent, plus it costs much less, it becomes much easier process versus hiring in-house, in office. Consider taking into account the fact that also the candidates you interviewed, they do not need to travel into your office. So everything is happening remotely with Zoom calls, test tasks, and other communication tools. So the concerns, on the other hand, are that you have much less control over the remotely hired developers or team of developers because they are simply not based in your office. When we work in the office, we, in a sense, forced to communicate with one another, and you as a product owner have much more control over your team versus when you're working remotely. And that also shows itself in a risk of losing your intellectual property. So some developers could simply take off with your startup code or startup idea. And again, it would be much harder to do if this person would be working within the office environment together with you. But if you have the right process and tools in place, then all of that can be mitigated. One thing I would like to also say on hiring is that if you are first startup founder, first time launching a startup, and you are in the fintech industry, or you don't have extensive amount of technical expertise managing a remote development team, then I would highly suggest you to avoid hiring individual developers and freelancers remotely, because they are very complex to handle and manage them. So unless you have the experience and technical expertise within that sector, then I would better suggest you try working with a larger organization or with a specialized small development team who specifically work on fintech startup solutions or fintech applications for web and mobile. So now let's discuss the common issues within the remote team management as opposed to the in-office management. First of all, in-office rules do not apply because well, you work in the same office environment, very often your team members, they simply bump into one another either near the coffee machine or during the lunchtime or after work, and this informal communication points, they have helped to fill in the gaps within your business procedures and official business meetings. Let's say one of your team members simply didn't get the task enough, didn't understand it correctly. So the other team member can help him or her out to properly onboard with this particular task. With the remote team, we have none of these informal communication points. Everything is based on request. It's either you sending somebody a request for communication via text or giving them a call, or they send you the request or give you a call. So everything should be much more structured. The second one is about inconsistency with the process. Some of you, as a product owner, might find or identify that your remote team is not really that excited of following your process of managing them. And that's usually happens either in a situation when you have a very complex and very tough, very strict process, or on the other hand, your process is very much like an in-office process, very slim, and your team members simply do not feel enough accountability in order to follow it. Then with the remote team, any tech debt is very crucial to eliminate versus, again, the in-house, in-office team environment where we communicate and socialize aside from the official business meetings. With remote team, if things are not documented, then they're usually lost. And that relates to not completed tasks or not closed tasks in task management tool, not finished documentation, reporting, etc. And last but not least is the social fear of communication. So there are lots of people who are shy, and there are lots of people who are excited to communicate with one another. And again, in the office environment, we're all forced to communicate because we simply located in the same environment, in the same office. So with the remote team, there is no such setup. So everybody is on their own, and some people might be not as excited to communicate certain issues to other team members. That is why having a proper product development process is very important for a remote development team. So now let's cover the process itself. Within this presentation, first we'll talk about the fintech specific things to take care of, because again, we're talking specifically about the fintech startups. Then we'll talk about tools, then the rules of how to use those tools, and then obviously reports and regular calls. So number one, the things to take care of for your fintech startup. Very important thing to take care of at first when you hire a remote development team or remote software developers individually, you should make sure that your development team is fintech oriented. That means that if you are launching a product within the crypto ecosystem or traditional fintech, your development team or a lead developer must be an expert within this type of products. Or let's say you are launching a new product for traditional fintech, maybe a trading terminal for professional traders. That means that your lead developer should know how to trade and should actually have this maybe as a hobby. And that would ensure that you have at least the core developer within your team fully understanding the product, how everything works, and he or she going to be speaking your language, so to speak. And that is very, very important. Because why it's important is because the fintech, again, it's a very complex industry, so to speak. So the second aspect is the regulation. So the regulations for different markets and different countries within the fintech industry are very different. And if your development team is not aware with your industry, then they will probably miss on regulations towards which their product should comply, right? With what kind of regulations they should comply. And if you don't know all the aspects and they don't know all the aspects, that is definitely not the best approach. And there is no time to educate one another. So it's very important you find people who are also familiar with the regulations specifically for your country. That brings us to the third level, is the IP protection. So within the fintech industry, the products could be extremely efficient, especially if we're talking about something related to trading, and they can be extremely expensive to build. So make sure that you sign the agreement with the developers, every single developer you have on the team or organization you work with, which states that it is a work done for hire. That means that all the work the developers are doing for your fintech startup from day one is owned by you. And so there is no intellectual property transfer event based on payments or something else. This way, you ensure yourself that you own the intellectual property working with your remote team. And the last part is about the legal leverage. So if you hire a remote development team, but they're based in the other country, naturally, you don't necessarily have that much excitement of going after the development team if something goes not in the right way with legal leverage. And make sure that this organization or the developers, individual developers you hire, they either have headquarters within your country or the developers are actually located within your country. This way, if something doesn't go as planned, at least you can apply legal measures. Otherwise, it will be quite challenging. Now, let's talk about the tools that are important to use within the product development management process, specifically for remote team. First of all, I would suggest using task manager, professional task manager like Pivotal Tracker, Jira, Asana, or something similar. But I would recommend to avoid certain simple solutions like Trello or something else, because they would not be good enough in order to keep track of all the activities within the tasks. And we'll discuss it on our next slide. Second, for the calls, I would highly suggest avoid using social tools like WhatsApp and other social-oriented communication tools for calls, because there are no recordings of these calls, so you cannot have the log, and you cannot use these recordings either for the notes or again for the legal leverage if something goes wrong. So using Zoom could be ideal, and there are plenty of other tools like Microsoft Teams and others. Text communication, same approach. If you're using consumer-oriented text messaging tools, then it's not necessary that it's useful for the team to communicate, and it's also not that useful for the business log of your communication, so you don't have the exact history of all of the team communication in one place. So using Slack, that's what we prefer in our organization, or Microsoft Teams, would usually work very well. Aside from that, you also need to have a dashboard for daily short updates. Now, that might seem like an excess, but I will explain how exactly we apply it within this process, and you'll see that it is very, very useful. In our organization, obviously, we have it as a proprietary tool, but there are plenty of similar tools on the market as SaaS solutions, and you can obviously utilize them for your team. And then aside from that, you have Git repository for code storage and other specialized tools that your developers would need to use, or specifically on your fintech startup project. So now let's discuss how to use those tools, because you can have amazing tools, but the problem is that how you use those tools. If you do not know how to use the tools, then chances of you succeeding are very, very slim. So what we identified through years and hundreds of different projects is that it is very important to break down the project into different chunks, into different phases. So if you're starting a new product, that your first phase of the product is going to be a minimum viable product, the first version of your application, fintech application. So it usually lasts between 1 and 3 months. But for the MVP, minimum viable product, it could last obviously a little bit longer. So what we do, we estimate in a ballpark how long and how much it would cost to complete this first phase of the application. And then we focus on the first weekly sprint, first week of the software development process, and we allocate the tasks in the task management tool only for that first week. The rest of the tasks are important, but specifically for this week, we only focusing on them. So the rest, you don't need to spend time entering like the tasks in the task management tool for entire 6 months or 3 months of work during the first weekly session. Focus only on this first week, and you estimate every single task in hours. Now, some of your team members might say that they're not used to estimating tasks in hours, or even you might say that it's artificial. But in reality, every one of us work on the hourly schedule, because on average, full-time work, meaning we work 5 days a week around the globe, 8 hours per day, on average 40 hours per week. That is the full-time position, the definition of it, so to speak. So that means that in a nutshell, we're all working according to the hourly schedule. And when your developers, even if they do not have experience estimating tasks in hours, they start applying this rule, you'll see that they maybe miss their points significantly within the first 2 to 4 weeks. But after that, they'll quickly get used to this process, and their estimates will be much more accurate. So now, why it's important to allocate just weekly sprints and estimate only the number of tasks for 1 week is because it's very easy to allocate the tasks for 1 week of work, because it's a short period of time. And second, it's very easy to check the results of this work for just 1 week. And in our experience, we experimented with weekly sprints, bi-weekly sprints, and monthly sprints, and we found that they are much more challenging to work with. Weekly sprints are the best. And then it brings to the call schedule. So what we would suggest is to avoid daily stand-up calls and only focus on having 1 call per week at the beginning of the weekly sprint. On that, our team and estimated by the team for this weekly sprint. And this way, everybody keep accountable and everybody is on their toes, because everyone is on their toes because they know, the team you manage know that they're going to be working only on the tasks that you approved on this call and that are entered and estimated in task management tool. And you as a product owner know that the team is going to be working only on the tasks that you approved on this call. So it makes everyone accountable. And then after this, it is plenty of time to communicate in text throughout the rest of the 4 days of the weekly sprint. So what we usually suggest is to avoid communicating through the entire day. Some managers would prefer to send messages every 10 minutes to their team members. And as you might find different psychological studies on the internet, usually they say that on average it takes about 20 minutes for a person to get back into the focus state or state of flow and actually continue their work at their 100% capacity. And imagine if you would be messaging to your team members every 10 minutes, that means that they would never get back into this focused state, the state of flow, and they would be working at half of their productivity, if not less. So, and what we found that the most successful projects we managed usually have the communication slots at the beginning of the day to chat in Slack, in text, for about 2 to 4 hours. This way, your developers would know that they have a specific time allocated for communication and discussing any given issues. And obviously, if you have a necessity for maybe an urgent call, your server went down, then obviously you can proceed with that as well. But the rest of the day, they can focus and work on their task at their full capacity. And the last part, but not the least, that pretty much glues all of it together, the daily reports. So while you communicate through task management tool, you have 1 call per week, and then you have a text messaging tool. It's also very important to ask your team members to post daily updates, but they should not be daily reports half-page long. They actually should be just 1 to 2 lines long, so meaning 1 to 2 sentences long. First of all, it's very easy to write them after a long day of hard work. And second, you'll be surprised, but you as a product owner sometimes you wouldn't want to read the reports because you are too tired at the end of the day. But when those reports are so short that they're just 2 lines long, then it's very easy for you to digest and read them. And this way, you can always be at the top in terms of what has been happening throughout the day with the team progress, especially when you maybe are fundraising or you're traveling for business and you don't have enough time to communicate with the team through Slack or participate on calls. Then at least you have a full log of daily updates from every team member, so you can see what has been done on a day-to-day basis through the entire week. And then at the end of the week, or I would say the first week of the following weekly sprint, you have a call to discuss the list of completed tasks from the previous week and to approve the list of tasks for the upcoming weekly sprint. And then this cycle repeats. So as you can see, it's very important to keep it all balanced and have those things in moderate use rather than in excess or complete absence. So another important factor to discuss with the remote development team is the code delivery rules. Make sure that they commit the code in a code repository on a daily or weekly basis. So in case something happened or they disappear, who knows what might happen, right? At least you have the code that they have completed and you paid for. Then obviously you should consider a third-party code review, and with a remote development team, it should be a norm. There is nothing strange about it because you do not control the team. They are all based remotely, and you want to make sure that they deliver in the code according to what you agreed, and this is the code of high quality. So that means maybe you are not a technical founder or your technical expertise is not high enough to conduct the code review yourself as a founder. So you can find a third party, much more experienced individual who've been helping other startups, or you can hire an agency who is specializing in that. Then obviously have backups, because technically with the remote development team, they're working not from your machines, not from your computer, as opposed to the situation within the office environment where you have your own computers there. So make sure that you have the backups of all the systems in case something goes wrong. And then I would highly recommend you to get a technical savvy advisor if you're a non-technical founder. If you're a startup founder, that could be literally a startup advisor, or if you work for a large organization and you manage a particular new project within your department, you can approach your IT department to help you out, just to advise you on certain aspects within the remote team management. And then the last part of this presentation is about the social aspects. So since we do not have that many informal communication options when we are based remotely, make sure that you are kind to one another and you are kind to your team members, because they simply cannot see your face or in what mood you are today. And you also cannot see that it's about them unless you jump on a Zoom call with them. So agree with the team that no matter what the situation is, you're always going to be communicating from the perspective of positive attitude and understanding. Even if there is an issue, then again, your team working towards resolving this issue. Second aspect is obviously communicating the news, no matter what the news are. What that means is that sometimes people are so afraid to tell you that maybe something wrong with the server or something wrong with the application, and they think that they would first fix it, and only after that they will reply to you as a product owner. Make sure that you discuss with them that nobody waits for no special situation. If something happened, then it should be immediately communicated. And technically, as a product owner, you should promise them that you, A, won't be angry, and B, you won't fire them. Because I can guarantee you on this last portion of the presentation that every single team member within the remote team will fail once or twice, even more, and you yourself included. And it's all fine. We're all human beings, so we make mistakes. But just make sure that obviously you keep a close look on that. And maybe if one particular team member makes the mistakes all over again, and they're all the same, then maybe that's the time to say goodbye to this particular team member. But aside from that, it's all based on kindness, positive attitude, and very sharp communication. So I hope this presentation was useful, and now I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Hi everyone, thank you. Welcome back. And hey Alexey, thank you for joining us. How's the weather in your place?
Well, Los Angeles is quite warm place, even during the winter. So roughly 75, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, during the day. So I can't complain.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. So we are going to have a few questions from our audience members. First of all, if anyone in the audience does have a question, do not be shy. Please do drop it in the comment section and we will address it hopefully when we have time. Before we start though, there's a pressing question that I'm pretty sure everybody wants to know. Alexey, what hair conditioner do you use? Because your hair looks amazing.
Thank you. Actually, I do not use any. So, I guess thanks to my parents.
That's good. I got it from my mama. It's a legit good response.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your presentation today. I think it's very important to know how to manage remote teams, especially since the pandemic. So I just wanted to ask if during the pandemic, in the last a year, 2 years, I think time has kind of gone past. But in the past 2 years, how has the demand for managing remote teams, has it grown? Has it changed in any way?
Oh yeah, for sure. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we've seen businesses overall just getting shy over starting new projects and hiring more people, because it was a time of uncertainty, and I would say nobody really knew where the markets would go, up or down, and how the entire economy would move. So many specialists were predicting a crash pretty much. But thankfully, it didn't happen, and the economy, I would say, I think it's very strong simply because nowadays it's not like 10 years ago. We have most of the businesses operating online, and lots of the businesses, not fully, but obviously partially, uh, have their economies and business operations running online. So in the second part of the pandemic, I would say second part of the 2020, we've seen a healthy spike after the businesses seen a recovery turn, or they understood that it's not the end of the world, and we've seen actually an increased activity in terms of hiring remotely and being open to work with remote first approach because it became a necessity. And I think it's a continuous trend because all the tools are out there that support our communication remotely and allow us to work efficiently remotely, specifically in software development world. And I think this trend will continue. More and more companies will go this route.
Definitely, definitely. And I think you have a point as well, like not just in your industry, but also we've seen an uptick in a lot of other digital adoptions all around different platforms as well as industries. Even when it comes to our previous, I don't know if you caught our previous speaker as well, she was talking about the uptick of digital usage in Malaysia and also in the region in general. And I think this unique situation also brought in unique problems. And one of our audience members, Jane from Jublia, has one of these unique problems. So she asked this question, right? Would this process, your process before, work if the remote team consists of 20 developers?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, we did have such projects where we would have up to 20 developers on the project working simultaneously. And yes, this process definitely works when you manage even 20 developers. The only difference is that please take into account that we're all humans, so it's very hard to manage 20 people. And psychologically, it's known that um, I would say up to 7 people, maybe 10 would be a stretch. Uh, you can manage efficiently. So if you have a team of 20 developers, then I would highly suggest you to identify lead developers who would be able to manage 5 to 7 developers and maybe collect daily updates from them and post them for you as a manager to review, because it would be very hard to communicate simultaneously, let's say on weekly calls with all the 20 people. But if you have one lead developer and a couple of developers, senior level, then it would be much more easier, and then they would be managing the rest of the development team.
Yeah, thank you. And I think also it links to what you mentioned before about managers in general, right? Like how you need to hire a manager that also speaks your language. If you're not a tech person, then you probably need to hire someone who knows tech but can also speak money. So
Yep.
yeah, that's cool. We have another one from David Wong from Jublia. Thank you so much to our peeps in Jublia who are giving us such wonderful questions. So David asked, any tools? Do you have any tools that you would recommend to manage teams and projects?
Yeah, as I mentioned during my presentation, again, it is specifically for the software development team. So for task management, you can use Pivotal Tracker or Asana or Jira from Atlassian. Then for calls, it's obviously a Zoom. And then for text messaging, that's Slack or Microsoft Teams. There are some other solutions, I would say maybe less popular, but those are all business-oriented solutions. And I would definitely suggest you to avoid using simplified solutions, like arcade mode, so to speak. Maybe they would be good to track your uh, diet or just a shopping list. But for team management, please make sure that you use professional software.
Yes, thank you for that. Before we move on to our next question, I did want to ask, earlier you mentioned that you've experimented with 1 month sprints, bi-monthly sprints and weekly sprints. So that's and you found that the weekly sprints work the best. So in terms of setting the tasks for those weekly sprints, what kind of tasks would you recommend to be set within that weekly sprint? Because I imagine there'll be a variable amount of different tasks that you could set. How would you prioritize those?
Yeah, well, again, during the software development project, tasks could be anything, right? Even if you're in the design phase and you're designing the user interface, so even those tasks could be allocated and estimated in hours uh, for a particular weekly sprint. I would say the main point here is that just keep in mind that the weekly sprint is just 40 work hours on average for a full-time employee in your team. And that means that whatever the tasks they might have or you have on the project, it definitely can be allocated. There might be some difficulties when the tasks are a little bit more complex and they might take more than 40 hours. But then again, you can simply put it exactly like how many hours it would take specifically during this sprint, and then the second estimation, like how many hours it will take total. Again, it's just for your team to make sure that you're all on the same page and you fully understand each other, even though you're remotely based. So you can see, okay, for this particular task, we're gonna take 40 hours for this entire week for this particular developer, but the overall task will take, let's say, 65 hours or something like this. So this way everybody's on the same page, and you as a product owner and your developer would know that you're busy with this task this week, and a part of this task will be continued on the second weekly sprint.
Okay, thank you. So just to recap, that means you take whatever that you can you take whatever task that you can and you break it down into a weekly sprint where then you can complete it within that time. Okay, cool.
Yes.
We have another question from, sorry, so sorry. So we have another question from Chin On Ong from Jublia as well. So she asks, other than digital finance, does algorithmic trading solutions for retail or pro investors slash traders have some sort of future as well?
Okay. Well, let me digest it. I'm not entirely actually sure I fully understand it, because technically, um, algorithmic trading and like it's been evolving into the digital world, and that's just the future for pretty much everything we do, right? So everything is becoming digitalized. So I'm not sure how professional investors how they could get aside from that. I would say maybe it's not a direct answer to this question. Well, maybe direct answer is just everything is getting digital. So I'm not sure what other routes we could take in the real world in terms of the investment, because digitally everything, I would say, is simplified, so to speak. So we need to make less steps in order to achieve certain results, and certain aspects can be automated, so we can make less steps again to achieve a specific result. So that's why overall digitization of all sorts of products, including trading, investment, and I'm speaking about professional investment too, of large accounts, um, trading funds, etc. So all of them are turning their heads into the world of crypto and digital finance. So I think that's the main route.
Okay, wonderful. So the short answer is yes, but it depends on what industry you're in and what you need it for. Am I wrong? Am I right? Let me know.
I would say literally every single anything related to finance is moving digital. So this is like a yet another boom that we experienced. The first wave was when we've seen the PayPal with and some other products that would help consumers, and now we're looking at the infrastructure and um, investment and banking. Uh, all of them are moving in further into digitization. So I would say that the only future is just digital. So that's the answer to the question.
Wonderful. Thank you. I agree with you. That's why I am here. I'm seeing this event, and we have a lot more people who are also interested in this. And we have one of these from named Kamaruz Afandi from YouTube. Oh, sorry. Yes, Kamaruz Afandi from YouTube. Apologies. So the question is: do you recommend a transition to a local team? And have you had any experience facilitating some knowledge transfer from your remote team to a local team?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I wouldn't recommend moving to a local development team unless you have some upsides, right? So if your remote development team is already successfully delivering the product, then it does make sense to continue working with them. However, as I mentioned during my presentation, is that it's really good to have a technical savvy advisor, or in your case, if you're not a technical founder or not a technical product owner, then I would highly recommend maybe hiring somebody in-house, at least one person who would be able to help you to hold the technical expertise in-house. And if it's your personal preference or your company's preference to start building an in-house local team, then by all means, obviously do that because it's up to you to decide which way to steer your business or your product. And then yes, we had plenty of experiences moving the products from our remote teams to the in-house teams of our clients, and that's a normal process. Plenty of companies been doing it for years, and with remote team, there is no difference. As soon as the code is clean, the documentation is in place, and the process is streamlined, the onboarding of new development team members is pretty much an easy one. So there are no issues.
Mm. In that same kind of vein, what are some unique tips or some specific tips that you could possibly give to our audience members regarding that transfer of knowledge? Anything that we should they particularly pay attention to?
That's a good question. Now for another discussion. So well, first of all, I would definitely recommend you to check off all the legal papers and that you have all the code under your accounts, right? So that is the first level of transition, so that you know that legally you're protected, you legally you own everything, and then that the code and the server accounts they all belong to your company. That is the first step, and then obviously you would need to transition your, I would say, knowledge or development knowledge to your new team members, in let's say in-house team members, then you would need to identify one or multiple team members from your current remote development team who would be responsible for the transfer of knowledge and onboarding new developers. Because in a sense, for them, there should be no difference whom they would onboard, yet another developer with a remote team of their own, or this remote team would onboard your in-house developer and explain him or her what to do with the code and where to start. And just make sure that you are on the same page with this remote team, that this process is starting and that these are the particular people who are responsible for this. And then make sure that you keep an eye on this, how the process is going overall. And obviously, make sure that you schedule certain timeline of when the transition will be completed. And again, if the code is clean and everything is going well, then it shouldn't take that much time. Usually the transition could take anywhere from a couple of days for simple projects up to entire months for more complex projects, specifically within the fintech industry or healthcare.
All right, thank you. So I think if I could take one thing away from your presentation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is that even though we are unstructured and all over the world in terms of the team, but in terms of structure and in terms of accountability, you must make sure that you have people who are in charge in order to help distribute and streamline that process of communication as well as development, even though you are not in the workplace environment. One of the big takeaways. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly. So you absolutely need to have a person who, like, again, this person could be you if you are an experienced product owner and you've been managing developers before, and then you can just take some takeaways from my presentation and apply them successfully to your team management. But if you do not have such experience, then I would highly recommend you to ask your remote team to supply you with this type of technical account manager or the project manager to help you set up this process correctly, or you can simply hire somebody in-house who has this experience managing remote teams, because managing even in-house team is a very complex task. Managing a remote team is equally complex, if not more complex, if you don't know what you're doing. So having the person in place who knows how to deal with this process and how to correctly manage the team and the overall product development process would increase your chances for succeeding dramatically.
All right, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time and we have to move on to the next one. But before we go, do you have anything, any last words, just very quickly before we go?
Well, first of all, that's a Thanksgiving here in the United States, so I wish everyone a happy day and happy Thanksgiving, so to speak, just as a local tradition. And good luck everyone with their products, and obviously pay attention to the process. That's the key.
All right, thank you so much, Alexey. And thank you so much for all our audience members for giving in such wonderful questions. I will be back soon so that we can move on with the rest of the program. I'll see you later. Bye.